Welcome. Thank you for joining our CRM Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Larry Isaacson, CRM Practice Director, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, validation considerations for mobile devices. The USDM team is proud to have Larry in a leadership role. He offers over 20 years experience in the application of GXP compliant IT technology within life science organizations. Larry has experience in manufacturing, software development, and clinical and laboratory contract services management environments, and he recently led the implementation and validation of FDA-regulated global ERP laboratory and quality management systems. He has experience in establishing IT and quality strategy, project, and change management programs. Also, he's held the position of Director of IT in pharma, biotech, and med dev companies. He holds a Master of Sciences in the Pharmaceutical Research Sciences. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 300 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Our various dedicated practices include global quality and auditing, IT and virtualization, life sciences cloud, UDI, track and trace practice, governance, risk and compliance, laboratory, which includes systems and equipment, the ECM, ERP, and PLM practices, our enterprise quality management, manufacturing automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, project management, and of course, the CRM practice. The content will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the iLink message board, which is in the lower left of your screen. Or you can join our discussion on LinkedIn. We have a group out there, and you can post questions, or we are happy to address questions offline. Just shoot us a note at USDM.com. Thanks for taking the time to join us, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Larry.
Well, thank you, Becky, and thanks everyone for joining us for this very interesting topic about the impact of mobile devices in a regulatory context. And anyone who's been working in this area knows that we've basically had a tsunami of change in IT, the most recent wave being the mobile device becoming a substitute for our traditional interfaces, with huge benefits and also some regulatory impacts that often are being overlooked. So today we're going to cover this agenda that gives everyone an overview of this area. There's a lot of deep issues in here that we can subsequently handle in other webinars. But right now, people are struggling with just to understand the scope of these issues and moreover, have not even become aware of the impacts that we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about overall the factors driving the uptake of mobile devices in this space. Let me get my little check mark on here. And we're going to also cover what is the challenge that mobile devices pose to compliance, how are regulatory bodies reacting to the emergence of these new platforms. There's a lot of interesting new activity coming out of the FDA and others about how these devices should be regulated from a guidances are coming out, which will ultimately probably morph into regulations extensions. How to protect yourself from these unintended consequences when you adapt these mobile devices into already validated applications, and then we'll summarize the next steps. So everybody is very much aware of the fact that the IT platform has been changing. The entire platform that delivers validated application services to businesses has gone through several waves of change. Starting with virtual computing, which in the VMware context and the SAN context changed quite a bit of the landscape as to how you manage servers and storage and how you have to qualify them. Combining that with outsourcing of the back-end processes so that now the hosting of these virtual environments are moved to the cloud. And there's a large variety of different types of clouds we can be talking about. So now the control of these back-end processes are moving away from the primary owner. And then you have the client PC becoming basically an internet browser host rather than a full-fledged computing device more and more. So that's pretty much already happened. And people take this for granted that this is the way things work. And we have many other webinars and white papers that talk about how to deal with these trends, by the way, on our website. So with the cloud taking the role as your generalized computing environment and not quite very well characterized as it used to be, that creates some challenges that we've also covered in other areas in terms of how do you qualify a cloud. We've got the network morphing into a new domain of virtualization, virtually allocated real-time capacity allocation with a wide variety of networking technologies becoming part of the mix. Wireless and cellular networks are more and more the conduit, as well as Bluetooth being as part of that. And now we're seeing the swapping of tablets and smartphones trend to basically replace what the traditional PC's role has been. PCs are evolving basically to be a tablet with a keyboard optionally attached and other devices. So this results in a lower total cost of ownership, or an apparent lower total cost of ownership, certainly a lower threshold to be able to get into the business of application delivery, but also has some regulatory risk along with this model. And we're going to talk about that. So mobile devices are being adopted at a rate that has basically defied all predictions. A couple of years ago that were coming out of Gartner and others as to how quickly these would be adopted, driven by first by the iPad and then more recently by the power of mobile phones. So you've got these ultra-thin, low-weight, and long battery life devices, which really exceed quite a bit of what people have been used to with laptops, yet provide nearly the same capability, if not more. You've got your lower cost of ownership and lower cost of purchase in many cases versus a laptop. The total cost of ownership may be equivalent if you take into account the control mechanisms that should be in place to manage these in a validated environment. So we'll talk about that shortly. User familiarity. Basically, all the users in corporations are already users of these devices. They want to use these devices for work purposes as well as for their personal use. And so the corporations are quickly adapting these as as part of their suite of selections for interfacing their corporate systems. And in some cases are allowing the users more and more to use their own devices, which has some complexities associated with that as well. We'll talk about the bring your own device trend. And of course, the touchscreen has revolutionized the ease of use and for less tech-savvy users, and has allowed the penetration of computing into many more domains and populations than had been done earlier, with much less effort and cost. In addition, we find that there are some new capabilities that are made much easier with these devices, especially given their mobile capabilities, where we can do signature capture very easily. Anyone who has taken UPS deliveries knows that that's been in place for quite a while. and it does streamline many, many manual processes, and we see that being used in the CRM space more and more for service delivery in the field. Obviously taking photos and videos and documenting activities in the field, shipping damage, even adverse event findings is much more convenient with a phone or a tablet than had been heretofore possible, and is highly integrated into the application. And then, as we said, the extension of these applications to the field to mobile personnel for dedicated purposes and logistics is greatly facilitated by these devices and their handheld form factor. So more and more we're seeing, well, why aren't you using these mobile devices as opposed to why not? And with that in mind, we need to address what regulatory risks can come from adapting these in previously validated environments. Well, when you look at the audit criteria that someone would use to come in and audit a validated application, they're still using guidelines and regulations that presume that you've got an in-house IT hosting staff, you've got control of your processes, and you basically are end-to-end the owner of the process and can vouch for it pretty much with your internal capabilities or with your vendor management procedures and your auditing procedures. Everything is being focused pretty much from a regulatory standpoint on defining a known state and maintaining it. So from the qualification and validation regimen, the presumption is that you can do that and that you can maintain that control. And then when you're talking about medical devices, that's an even higher level of rigor in terms of the proprietary infrastructures that have typically been used for a Class 2 and 3 device, and is presumed to be under the control of the manufacturer from design to production, even if components external to them are being used. The presumption is when it's brought into the product, it's under full control and fully characterized, and is characterized and is well documented in the pre-market approval process and many other processes. And then the change control continues to manage that. But things are changing underneath these regulations, and the assumptions that underlie them may no longer be as valid as they were before. So your in-house change control, which is presumed to have complete scope of capabilities for these systems, which underlie the regulations, used to be sufficient to maintain this type of control and demonstrate the level of control that is being maintained. But the scope of change control is now going way beyond, the internal process to vendors that you know and vendors that you don't know. So basically what we see is that both the FDA and IT organizations and quality assurance organizations and validation groups are playing catch-up to update the guidelines to accommodate these new stateless models. Not always, stateless may be a bit of an extreme term to use, but that's where we're evolving to. Where the environment is so dynamic and can be updated so easily to meet requirements or to enable new capabilities, that the visibility of this is becoming more and more opaque. So when you look at this overall, you've got, on the left side, you've got your IT trends, which we talked about, starting with cloud, virtualization, IT outsourcing, the new tools that come along with many of these new capabilities and processes, and mobile devices on the left. And then on the right, we've got some of the risk factors that are emerging that need to be taken into account in this change that's going on. So you've got immature tools as a result of the fact that there are a new set of tools used to manage mobile devices and to develop software for mobile devices that are not nearly as well established and mature as the tools that have been in place a long time for the existing platforms on PCs and servers. As a result, there's a lack of expertise within IT organizations and within the business as to what's going on under the covers. The pool of talent available that's qualified versus hackers, let's say, is something to be considered. So to the extent that you're doing custom applications or modifying existing applications, the level of sophistication being used there and the awareness of change control, the awareness of audit trail requirements may be lacking, and facilities to support that may be lacking as well. You've got your old regulatory guidelines. The people are still coming in and expecting you to be able to answer the old questions as to how do you know this is under control? How do you know this is equivalent to what you did before? So you need to be able to have something that's going to demonstrate to someone that you've done your due diligence when you've brought in these new devices and new methods of access to an existing validated application or new applications. And then these bring your own device policies, which are really becoming extremely popular for good reason, because it's been a real bane of IT organizations to try and companies to have to provide these devices and regulate them and get people to use only the company device for not use it for personal use. And so there was a huge amount of flexibility being brought by allowing people to use their own devices, as well as a lower cost to companies, because people are very happy to just layer the enterprise capabilities onto their own device, and it's much more comfortable for them. However, along with that becomes a lack of visibility as to what's on that device, even more so in some cases than PCs. And then you've got your emerging new regulations. There are guidances that have been recently released by the FDA related to when an app becomes a medical device, and what constitutes a medical device, and also on radio frequency transmissions. There's an emerging guidance on how those need to be regulated and controlled, because there's a completely different set of security issues associated with highly sensitive data going over mobile networks. So what you have then is the regulatory risk is not insignificant, as you'll see here. And we're going to talk about how you can mitigate that to make this circle smaller. So what we found at USDM, especially in the CRM practice, is we go to clients and we see people overlooking these risks. Initially we're surprised by this, but at the same time we can understand where there's a lot of misconceptions. And we saw the same trend with the emergence of virtual computing and cloud computing, where people basically want to say, well, there's nothing really more to be done than we've always done before. It's equivalent. So I've heard people say, well, we know the mobile browser is equivalent to the PC-based browser, so we don't have to requalify this on a tablet or on a phone. There's a lot of magical stuff being released by vendors where you've got a browser-based interface and with just a few clicks of a button on the configuration side, suddenly it works on a phone and a tablet. The question is, how do you know it's working the way it did when you validated it on the PC? The vendor-provided tablet application is a copy of the already validated browser-based application. So obviously the vendor knows what they're doing. Why should we have to revalidate that? Well, that's really obviously a false assumption, and would certainly be nice if it was true, but in many cases it's not. The code, the approach to move to iOS is very different, and it really has to be understood that you have to demonstrate that equivalence. The mobile OS provides more robust application isolation and security than a PC, so no additional security mechanism or qualification of such is required. We've heard that. Of course, the exact opposite is true. This is still emerging. There are many companies that are now making a good amount of money compensating for the weaknesses in these OSs from a security standpoint. And there's many more openings in these environments than have been typically closed up in Windows over the many years that it has been in place. Not to say it's fail-safe by any means, but mobile OSs are relatively new animals compared to the legacy platforms. The other argument is, as a result of that, and this is often coming from technical people who make these judgments where they say, because of these equivalents, I don't really have to talk to QA or the validation department. since really this is just an extension of my existing application that's validated, and it's not really a change. It's just substitute. It's just like a different PC that I'm using for my browser instead of another one. And again, that's a very huge assumption. There may be some justification for that, but that has to be documented. That should really be demonstrated. And it's very easy to ask the question, how do you know that's the case? We've seen cases where people just weren't aware that the mobile platform that the vendor provides isn't running the same application code as the PC-based version, either due to omissions by the vendor or just rosy assumptions by the business, especially when the vendor is saying, well, you know, this is pre-qualified, it's off the shelf. And we're starting to see a lot of interpretations taking liberties with off-the-shelf notions, where something that's off the shelf and highly configurable is being used often as equivalent. And we all know that in the GAMP framework, something that's highly configurable is a Category 4, and it requires a higher level of proof and validation typically. And when the vendor comes in and says, don't worry about it, we've pre-qualified it, the question is against what requirements? And how does that fit with your validation, both on the platform side as well as the application side? But the danger is being lulled by vendor assurances when you're the people who are actually obligated to demonstrate that these things are true and not the vendor. So why should this be a point of concern? Why is a mobile device different than a PC and all the other things, the RF devices we've been using in warehouses? Well, the source of these devices is very different. They're coming from a very consumer-oriented perspective. They're loaded with all sorts of functionality that has nothing to do with what you're trying to do. They have a completely different model of management of their application and software. And we'll talk about what's going on behind the covers. So these are a very new type of animal from the standpoint of what's going on in the background. The new OSs, as we said, are new. They're not as well characterized to IT organizations as something like Windows is, or Windows Server, or any of the other back-end systems that people are used to. These systems are upgrading themselves on a regular basis. It's not as opaque as it used to be. Sometimes they ask permission, and certainly for an OS upgrade it does ask permission, but if you're putting your validated application out on a user's device, they have the choice to say yes when these updates are being requested. And if you didn't validate your particular application on that device on the version of iOS, let's say, or Android that they're choosing, you may not know if your application is going to continue to work. So there's got to be some awareness of how this is being managed. And then, as we'll discuss, there's a whole new set of security frameworks that come along with these platforms. So to say these are equivalent to PCs is a long, long stretch. So when you look at at a high level the overall transitions we're going through here, before we had PC-based mobile platforms, the legacy OSs that were very well characterized, and these are still very much in place, and they're being layered on with mobile OSs with proprietary features, often without much scrutiny other than let's get them to work. And what you're dealing with in terms of your environment is you have a lack of IT familiarity. In general, much of this work is being outsourced as a result. You've got a loss of synergy from prior platforms. I imagine Microsoft would say if you're using a Surface tablet, a Windows tablet, you're not losing as much of that synergy, which may be true, but I haven't assessed that yet. But you've got a knowledge gap and you've got support issues. You're not going to get the same support on these OSs from the vendor that you've gotten from Microsoft, let's say, many of the other vendors. In the past, you've had client control over the software updates. There are a wide variety of mechanisms in place for the legacy databases and applications and the rest, and OSs for the user to control how this is done, and all sorts of policy capabilities that exist. Now we've got vendor wireless updates going on, which are invisible to the enterprise that's deploying these applications in many cases, and may or may not be detectable. So we have a lack of state control and certainly an ability to demonstrate that control without doing something special. We used to have well-established PC image and configuration control mechanisms similar to what we have for updates. We need a new set of platform controls and procedures for mobile devices. While there are similarities to what we have for laptops, there's a different set of tools being used and different control points that also have to be thought about. So there's an investment in training, qualification, and validation when you add these devices, not just at the application level, but also at the platform level. You've had your well-established security mechanisms and OS in place for applications for quite a long time in the typical server and PC spaces. Now we've got a new set for these devices coming with the new OSs. So we have to basically ensure that these security and authentication protocols are in place and that they're best practice and that they're working. And they're not the same as what you use with PCs in many cases. And then you've got your well-established software development kits for your custom work, and you've got well-defined audit trails, in many cases in your database now. These still exist to the extent that you're working with a cloud that you're in control of, and you've got your databases in there, and all the transactions on the mobile device are being done remotely and coming up into your central system. But there's also many cases where these things are acting standalone and have their own local databases, and when they get connected later updating data, those two scenarios have to be well understood. And how is the audit trail being managed? Is the audit trail all central, or does there need to be one down on the mobile device as well? It all depends on your intended use and your architecture. So at the very least, you've got to have methodologies for software development that apply to mobile devices. Things like how do you manage environments, what's your quality environment look like if you're developing custom apps, how do you manage those changes underneath your application. And then there's, of course, the integration side, which I didn't have on here, which is how are you integrating to Active Directory? How are you integrating into your existing legacy systems, depending on your use? So ultimately, what this brings you to is, how am I managing my mobile device? If I'm going to qualify this device and be able to vouch for it, I have to have a robust management capability and regimen that I can stand behind and demonstrate the same levels of controls that I've had in my legacy platforms and environments that I've. So if I'm hosting internally versus externally, I've got to have the same levels of control in place externally, and the same with on these new client devices. So there's a software management side to consider. How do you manage the configuration? How do you lock it? How do you monitor changes when they occur? How do you control updates? How are you backing up and possibly restoring these devices in the case of a problem for critical data? How do you know about the performance and the versions, etc.? So this is a monitoring and control capability similar to what you've had on laptops, but different sets of tools are required to do that. There's a consideration for containerization, which is well established in legacy OSs in many cases. It's very interesting that for something like VMware virtualization, when that first came out, this was a big concern. Is there truly a hard firewall between the virtual machines? How do you demonstrate that? And this has become more and more robust with each version. It was not as robust early. Well, the same issue applies to these mobile devices. And there are ancillary applications that will ensure that you are not having potential crosstalk across applications, some of which you control, some of which you don't control. File synchronization. Obviously, you are moving big files in many cases from these devices. You need to have secure file synchronization, and it's not FTP. So there's a different set of protocols involved, and the ability to recover from problems, and then failure mode analysis and all the rest of it needs to be thought of. There's the typical policy management capability that comes with mobile device management, where you can define policies like you would in Active Directory that would apply across your device OSs and types. And of course, this is a very important area, because when you talk about all the variations across the versions of OSs and across the versions of devices, and the fact that Android has different flavors depending on the vendor who's provided the phone in many cases, with a lot of very, very powerful differences between these devices, you have to make sure that your application, your validated application, is not being affected by these variations in these OSs. Security management, obviously, very important. You've got your encryption, authentication, firewall, antivirus, VPNs for mobile, remote locking, and remote wiping capabilities that you want. There was a very interesting article recently in the Wall Street Journal that got a lot of attention related to the fact that people are reporting that when they've used their own personal devices in this bring your own device context, that when they left the company, or if someone just plain made a mistake, they find that their phone, their device, or their tablet was completely wiped, and their personal stuff, etc. It wasn't very discerning as to what data it was wiping. It wasn't limited to the corporate data. So there's immaturity here. There's lack of awareness. But these things are emerging, and they need to be managed, and they need to have procedures around them. And then, of course, we talked about the integration with Active Directory and the rest, which would allow you to manage across all these platforms. And I have a white paper that's out on our website that describes in more detail some of these issues and some of the companies that are offering these types of tools called mobile device management tools. And it's becoming a whole domain unto itself of IT management. So what we're looking to at the end of this is, if you've got your risks here on the side that come with all these new IT trends and platform changes, and on the right we've got the mitigations. So the first thing is formal assessment. There's got to be awareness of these changes that they're going on, that you're introducing a tablet or a phone to an existing application, that it may or may not have different capabilities or extended capabilities compared to what had typically been used in the field. And you have to assess those impacts. Retrospectively, if you've already done it, and then prospectively for new applications or for the addition to existing applications. You've got to have your administrative procedures and change control. So, typically you go in and qualify an application, and you want to know the platform is under control. You want to verify there's SOPs specific to these new platforms, because they're not the same as managing a PC. So you would expect to see an SOP for how you're managing that remote device, that iOS device, if it's got both routinely and then if there's a problem. How's the call center handling this versus someone who's got a laptop? So there's a lot of impacts that come along with this, and if you're failing to even qualify or validate the addition of these devices to existing applications, you're missing this. Your SOPs will be out of date. They won't cover major new areas of control and concern for devices that are becoming more and more front and center as the way people are going to be interacting with your applications. So if you put these in place, if you're aware, you do your assessment, you do you put in place procedures and change control. You've got mobile device management tools, which are also covered by procedures and change control that people are trained how to use, and that there's a regular process of maintenance associated with it, just as you would a database or anything else out there. Then you're reducing that risk substantially. And then that is all documented in a formal qualification. So you can show that you've done your due diligence, that you've got documented evidence that you have shown that these things are equivalent in fact if they are, and that we have it under control, and we can protect the company from inappropriate use of data as well as corruption of data or loss of data. So there's many factors and dimensions, as we talk about, that's already covered in traditional validation. But now we're talking about a different domain, a different arena that has to be applied to. So we're trying to raise awareness here of the fact that if you completely forget about it when you add a tablet or phone to an application and you're now taking data in this way, there are things that need to be done to demonstrate that you haven't increased your risk. So just to summarize, the rapid evolution and adoption of mobile devices is creating an overlooked compliance gap. This compliance gap basically is what people are running into, and the awareness in audits is going to become more and more important as people start having problems and the authorities become aware of these impacts. And the fact that guidances are coming out already indicates that this is going to be more and more scrutinized. Basically, we want to make sure everyone understands that mobile devices should be subject to no less well-defined and accepted control standards than those for your well-established legacy platforms. So I'm not expecting, if I go in and do an audit, that you have good controls over here, but when it comes to mobile platforms, you've not applied those controls. Why? And then obviously the compliance regimen that you've had needs to evolve to take these into account. Both the technical side, the business side, the call center customer support side need to be involved with these changes for you to be able to maintain both compliance and service levels compared to what you've been used to in your legacy environment. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Becky for questions.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate the presentation and great information here. So we'll move forward and open the floor to questions. I see a few coming in. While the rest of you are typing in questions, I would like to let you know that the webinar has been recorded and will be available on the USDM website, which is USDM.com. Many of you are very familiar with our team and our capabilities around compliance projects, but I'd like to share with some of the newer folks that USDM offers 3 delivery options. And the first is our project team, which supports start-to-finish compliance. It's led by our SME practice directors or the SME project managers, utilizing the USDM team members with various skill sets. So based on your client preference, your preference as a client, we are flexible with the availability to work on site or remotely. If you just need extra hands to meet your project deadlines, USDM Staff Augmentation supports your internally managed projects with solid team members offering skills and experience specifically needed for your project. The goal for USDM is client delight, resulting in repeat business and excellent referrals. USDM Demand is our third option, and that's a blended on-site, onshore, offshore model for managed services, development and support, and validation testing. And this approach incorporates the cost savings of offshoring, but reduces the risk, ensuring a higher success than traditional offshoring. Our first question here, let's see. Tom is asking Larry if there are any guidance documents around validation requirements specifically for mobile apps.
The answer is no. I've done a lot of searching on that. And in fact, with some of the conferences, I've talked to the FDA about this, the FDA representatives there who were in charge of some of these new technology approaches in terms of their regulatory aspect, with cloud as an example. And while they're aware there are differences, we have not seen a guidance comes out specifically related to that. The most definitive one that we've seen is the one that, let me see, I've got it up here, right here. Let me give you the official title. Mobile Medical Applications Guidance for Industry and Food and Drug Related to Mobile Medical Applications. And this is a topic that we're going to do separately related to when is a mobile application a medical device, and sort of by definition, when does it make the phone or the tablet a medical device? We've actually had a conference recently with a couple of vendors, individual conferences, about upcoming devices that are where the phone or the tablet is being attached to a proprietary device to control or guide a patient on dosing. So there's a lot of diffuseness about where is that threshold. So this latest guidance for the FDA does a good job to say, well, if you've got an application, here's where the touch points are going to be, what you have to think about in order to determine, is this possibly a medical device? Is it a Class 2 or Class 3? Is it going to be a 501 filing or a PMA filing? And so this is starting to get addressed. And same with the RF. There's another guidance emerging related to RF that I read a couple of months ago. I don't have that up right here with me, but not specifically anything about the devices. And they say specifically in this mobile medical app guidance, by the way, is that they make it very explicit. They're not regulating phones. They're not regulating tablets per se, just as they don't regulate a laptop per se. But it's all about intended use. So are you using this as a vehicle to create or capture validated data? Well, obviously, this would typically fall into the realm of validation. Is it also affecting the way of very directly whether a patient is being, how they're being treated, or whether they're being diagnosed a certain way? Now you're moving beyond that into even a medical device realm that has to be assessed. So we haven't seen anything definitive specifically about the device itself, but it's really always going to be done within a context of how are you using the device.
Thank you, Larry. Christina is asking a question and offering a concern. Sounds like it requires a huge investment in time and resources for a company to implement these changes and updates for the regulations. Do you think some companies will simply restrict the use of mobile devices, particularly for purchasing online?
Well, in the past, that has been the case, because companies, from an IT policy perspective, were always very concerned, not just for regulatory purposes, but for intellectual property purposes and security purposes and data integrity purposes, that they know what devices are being used to access their corporate systems and databases. Now, having been in IT myself for 20-some years in management, I was battling many of those issues myself, and it was basically a losing battle. But you had to be able to have some control points in place, and that's where many of these specialized tools enable the IT organization to say, I've got a device that's being utilized for multiple purposes, some of which are not corporate, and there's basically an understanding now that you can't basically restrict all that function on these devices that are being used, in many cases 24 hours a day for work purposes, but you can't expect employees not to be able to use them for personal purposes. So that is where this bring your own device policies are being adopted now. But what we're saying is, along with that, at least for validated applications, there needs to be some layer that a corporate entity can put on there to provide some envelope, containerization, if you will, and security that you can vouch for, where at the very least, if the user is doing this on this device, I know that it's not going to affect this very important validated or regulatory application that's also being run here. And if it does, I'll know it. And that's what you want to be able to say at the end of the day. So I think that is the approach most organizations are going to take, as opposed to further restricting it, because I think the tide has already turned on that.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate that. So both David and Kathleen are asking if we have a specific listing for current guidances on devices, or where can those be found?
Well, the FDA website has all of that. That's where we get them as well. I'm not sure if we have a list on our website, but certainly doing Google searches for guidances, you'll go to the FDA website, and there's definitely an area where all these are available.
Thank you very much. So Jennifer is asking if we know if the FDA is revising any parts of the 21 CFR Part 11 to address mobile devices at this time.
I'm not aware of that. I haven't seen anything related to that directly. Pretty much what we've seen is the Part 11 provisions are general enough where they can be applied to any scenario. But there's always an assessment required and a set of judgment calls that we're expert at doing. I mean, that's why we're in this business, to be able to mitigate the risk based on the fact that the Part 11 requirements need to be met. So when you boil it all down, to the extent that you can demonstrate in any particular scenario that you've got authentication, that you know who's actually delivering the data to you, you understand how it got created, you can demonstrate the fact that it was secure and that it's valid. That's what Part 11 is basically asking for, among other things. And if there's an audit trail that you can recover or reproduce exactly what happened, those generic stipulations can be applied across a wide range of technologies and scenarios. But that takes some judgment as to understanding, in your particular case, where are my key variables, where are my control points that affect my ability to comply with Part 11, and make sure that I'm addressing those in my qualifications and my requirements and validation.
Thank you, Larry. Christopher would like to know if we could describe the challenges associated with data compartmentalization for GXP areas as it relates to cloud-hosted solutions. Example is clinical trial app hosting.
Right. Clinical trial app hosting, a whole range of applications are being hosted, and we do have separate webinars and white papers that we have on our website that goes into this in quite some depth. This is an area, if you go to any of the vendors of clouds, they have enormous, we're partnered with Salesforce among others, and Oracle, and they have extensive documentation of the security mechanisms that they put in place to ensure within the cloud that your particular virtual environment is isolated from everybody else's. Whether it's single tenant, multi-tenant, there are mechanisms to be able to demonstrate that. But you can't take it for granted. You actually have to be able to have that assessment done, and for your particular situation, know that the cloud that you're using and the way it's been deployed in your particular situation was done, from a best practice perspective. So that's a very deep question, but yes, there is quite a bit of material out there on how to deal with clouds, because they have the same issues as to are you secure, is your data and is your application isolated, is the configuration under control, what are you under control, what are you doing in terms of configuration, and what is the vendor or vendors responsible for, and are they trained, and do they have SOPs, and so there's platform level and there's application level and database level considerations in the cloud that all have to be addressed. And if you take a look at our website, we've got quite a bit of material out there that gives some guidance on that.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, we'll take one last question from Nathan. He's asking, what level of validation effort do you think would be necessary for something like physician sampling management? And this does not affect patient safety, but is required for sample management.
Oh, from a sampling perspective in terms of the distribution of drugs, what level of validation? Well, the regulations related to sampling come under a different area, and probably are not as rigorous as what we're talking about here for GXP, but they do have a set of provisions related to the marketing side, the sunshine laws, I believe they're called, and they are, from my recollection, they are not rigorously in the CRM world. You don't see the same validation requirements as we do for GXP when you're using CRM, let's say, to track product for traceability purposes. That's a different level, somewhat different level, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because in my view, that's an overlooked area, and more, especially when you're talking about track and trace requirements, I believe that sampling has the same basic requirements of any other ERP system, where the product that's being distributed to physicians has to be tracked and traceable. So that portion of the CRM, beyond the economics of how much money are you spending by handing these products out, which is part of the marketing side, on the financial control side, when you're talking about where did the product go and where is it right now, especially in case of a recall if that material can be given to patients, then that certainly would require a full validation, just as you would with an ERP system, in my view.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Larry. So I'd like to encourage everyone to just visit the USDM website and find more information around upcoming webinar events as well as today's recorded session. If you'd like to share that with colleagues, that's wonderful, or sessions of previously presented topics. We invite you to join the discussion on LinkedIn. We have a group there. And stay up to date with any upcoming events and presentations. And we'd love to hear your feedback. Let us know we're on the right track. And we also are interested in your suggestions for future presentation topics. If you let us know about any specific pain points or things that you're struggling with in compliance for life sciences, we're very happy to see if we can't tackle that with you. Thanks again, Larry, for presenting today, and thanks to everybody for taking the time to join us. We appreciate the opportunity to team with you in working towards excellence in compliance. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.